Mr. McHugh. My name is Grace. This is Justin. This is Ashley, Sandra, and Jennifer. And we're all on the TLU Honors Program. For this program, we were told to read a series of books. The first section is for your book deadlines. And it's a pleasure for us to have you. And we'd like to ask you a few questions, if you don't mind.
That'll be fine. I'm always happy to talk about it.
Okay. The first question is from Justin.
The push to obtain and develop the land at Corning Point and Costello for the purpose of making money reminds me of some of what I see going on near many of the places I go. And farmland is being bought up by developers to be resold for a large profit. If the developers continue to have their way with this, do you think that that food production within the nation could ultimately come to an end?
Well, I don't think food production in the United States is going to come to an end for one really big and important reason, and that is it's one of the few things that the United States can still do to adjust its trade balance overseas. One of the things that we can still make and sell in vast quantities is fruit and fiber, especially grains, wheat, rice, and corn. So, as a matter of national policy and as a matter of balancing the budget, the great industrial forces will try to find a way to do that. But I think deep inside of your question is another point, which is how do we manage land use in the best possible way, and how do we prevent profit-seeking predation on what makes the most sense. Corner Point and Deadlines was an abuse of public land. And it's actually based on a real-life investigation I did for the San Francisco Chronicle. Back in 1968, there was a very pivotal essay written by a man named Pierre Harding, who's one of the initial deep ecologists. It was called The Tragedy of the Commons. You may or may not have heard of it, but it's worth looking into. And what his premise was is when you had a collective resource with open access, then individuals would try to exploit it for personal gain to the detriment of all. And public land is the new commons. And as budgets get tight and as policies get corrupted or convoluted, what you'll see is more and more pressure on public assets in an effort to privatize them in some way. Here in California, we've got a recent example where Governor Schwarzenegger tried to take 11 major state properties and sell them and have the state lease them back so they could continue to use them, which would have been good for the new owners but terrible for the taxpayers of California over the long haul. So when it comes to farmland, especially with the pressures that we're seeing with global climate change, a smart policy would be to analyze what productive farmlands are going to be the ones that will be most viable in our changed climate situations, and definitely set those aside for agriculture. But that would take a collective, unimpeded will of the people, and right now we're seeing the collective will of the people thwarted all kinds of ways. Is there a ray of hope? I think there's another simultaneous thing that's going on with food production, which I would call dispersed sourcing, which means that more and more people are taking matters into their own, window flower pots growing herbs and growing chickens in the backyard and so on. And when you do that, when you disperse it, then you can also make use of things like domestic gray water and keep your own food production going. It's not the same as farmers, but it's a good thing. Same thing as with solar power generation, where you have dispersed power generation by people just putting panels on the roofs of their houses. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, our next question is from Jennifer.
All right, you talked a little bit about this, but what other parts of the novel may or may not be based on personal encounters? Like, what aspects of the book represent real events, characters, or places for you?
Yeah. Well, see, the thing about writing novels, writing what I would call, metafiction, by that I mean really big pieces of fiction, is you're trying to model the world. And you think about that as a writer, as an artist, one would need to use literally everything that you can think of, everything you can imagine, everything you can remember. Now, in the case of deadlines, situation deadlines, as I mentioned, Corner Point was based on a real-life investigative series I did in the 1990s which was about a state-owned land called the Silomar Conference Center near Monterey. And what happened was it was a state park that was put under private management, and over the years fell into really, really deep exploitation. And as I was working on that investigation, I was thinking, well, how much worse would this have to be for there to be a body involved? And in fact, while I was doing the investigation, since there were high stakes, I was, for a little bit of time, I was concerned the body might be mine. But what I did was, I was working on deadlines, because I thought, okay, I'm going to exaggerate this a little bit in the interest of art. You know, your poetic license gives you power to do that. And the other thing that I was going to do was blend in other stories I was aware of around California. For example, there was a state park called Will Rogers State Historic Park. And Will Rogers was a famous cowboy comedian during the FDR era. And he had a ranch near Northern Ranch, was gradually used more and more to house the horses and the riding activities of Hollywood stars. And so they were gradually trying to turn it into their own horse park. And it was only like a determined bout of local activism that made that situation come around. And this is another example, of course, of public resources, public assets being tried to turn to private gain and private enjoyment. Now, as far as the people are concerned, when I started writing this, I thought, okay, what we have to do if we're going to write a mystery is we need a detective, and in particular, we need a flawed detective because there is no more entertaining kind. So I needed a model for that. At the Chronicle, there was a very famous columnist by the name of Charles McHugh. And Charles McHugh was a very erudite guy. He had studied Michael de Montaigne, the French essayist, and he imagined that he was like Michael de Montaigne. And he wrote very, very good copy. But he was also a rampaging alcoholic and a nasty drunk. And so whenever he got in his cups, that the mayhem he could inflict on those around him was extensive. So my line on him was, he had no enemies, but all his friends hated him. And I thought, okay, I could create a character like that. But if I did, about a third of the way into the book, people would throw it across the room. So I needed to give it a redemption arc. So Paul McHugh, over the course of deadlines, gradually, rediscovers his true self, his true voice, and is saved by the actual activity of remembering what he was put on earth for. So those are some examples of turning personal, individual experiences into fiction. One of the things that I was proudest of in my 30-year career as a journalist was I was never accused of making up or distorting a quote, not once in 30 years. But the beauty of writing fiction is now, not only can I put words in people's mouths, I can invent people and tell them what to say. That's a very liberating thing for somebody who's been forced to write nonfiction for 3 decades in a row.
Nice.
Thank you. The next question is, what do you believe is the future of print media?
Well, that's a very large and tangled and cumbersome question. Actually, the question's simple. The answer is convoluted. A shakedown of considerable dimensions right now, and it's enhanced by digital media. I mean, things are changing not quite at the speed of light, but not far behind it. And the problem is everything we do has to be nurtured by an economic model of some sort. And what we're seeing in newspapers is the economic model has been really rather thoroughly trashed over the last 20 years. It's still surviving in some niches, and there will be some media that survives. So let's talk newspapers first. And what's going to happen, what seems to be happening is, in the shakeout, a lot of regional papers that have gone into steep decline and newsrooms are half the size that they used to be, which means, basically, if you want to continue the same proportion, that the ability of newsprint media, of the quote-unquote fourth estate, to be a social watchdog is similarly impaired. Now, you will see, I believe, the meta journals. By that I mean, basically it looks like right now, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and to some degree the Washington Post will be the last icon standing, whereas the regional papers are struggling to get by. Interestingly enough, there are two niches in newspapering that are doing rather well. One is ethnic media, and the other is small local local advertising-driven newspapers, the free handout newspapers. Those are all doing okay. When it comes to print, when it comes to books, that's a little more nebulous. We're kind of like in dubious battle contending on that. There are some advantages to a book that won't go away. A book is a codex, invented really around the time of Christ. The idea that you have this set of pages that you can riffle through and simultaneously access actually makes a book technologically proficient. It's still better even than an iPad, because you have to scroll an iPad the same way they used to be able to scroll a papyrus roll. So books actually still have a technological advantage. And then the other advantage that books have is that you can drop it, you can step on it, you can fling it across the room, and it still works. It's pretty hard to do that with your tablet. And then also the other advantage is, of course, once the book's been printed, the energy's been put into it, and it's pretty, to take that energy out, you have to set it on fire. Whereas in the web, in the cloud, and in your electronic device, the information that's coded has to be held in existence by the continual addition of more power. Otherwise, the second law of thermodynamics kicks in, and the system begins to decline. I compare that to a pedal-operated helicopter. As long as you keep pedaling, it stays aloft. So what happens to your ebook, what happens to your e-information if there's this immense solar flare that wipes out microchips? What happens if the power, you have an extended blackout and the generators come down? All of a sudden, all of your digital content goes poof. So there is a considerable advantage in having print media around. How much of it's going to be around, that's what we're going to have to figure out as a society in the years to come. It's interesting that right now, I read in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, that they're raising the prices of ebooks now because the publishers were finding them uneconomic. So the new Michael Conley, the new Stephen King book are not going to be at the Amazon pricing of $9.99. They're going to be closer to $16. So that's going to make books, if the price of ebooks goes up, it's going to make the prices of regular books seem more reasonable. And then the last point of recent changes in that regard is Amazon is considering kind of a Netflix model where you actually pay a basic subscription right, and then you've got access to an entire library. And it'll be interesting to see if that takes hold. So what's going to happen to print? I think, to sum up, you will see major newspapers continue. You'll see small local and ethnic newspapers do okay. And I think books will eventually find their niche. I think things will settle down a little bit, and people will be able to estimate the comparative advantages.
Okay, who's next?
Sandra, is there a question?
You talked about this a little earlier in another question, but I was wondering do you think writing a fiction novel was the most powerful way to portray your message?
Well, the most powerful. Right now I'd have to say that because that's what I'm putting all my energy into after having done 30 years in print and video journalism. I think a way to look at it is to think about the sheer importance of storytelling. Stories are really how humanity has always interpreted existence. Stories are how we probe ourselves, they're how we inspire ourselves, they're how we try to make sense of things. We all have a story we tell ourselves about ourselves, our individual life tale, our idea of an arc, our idea of ourselves as a hero, our idea of what's the next purpose, our idea of whether we're going to in our own lives live up to the love songs. So fiction storytelling is particularly valuable because it involves the imagination. And that's the great aspect of reading a story, a fictional story, as opposed to seeing a fictional story like in a movie. A fictional story in a movie, you're pretty much taken along for the ride. A fictional story in reading, your own forebrain is woken up and you're showing yourself the movie. That means that you color in the characters. That means you read between the lines. So even though movies have more impact, I think individually, reading a really good book has more impact, a really good fiction book on an individual. The problem right now with fiction is that it's becoming very formulaic. And that is a problem of book publishing right now. What book publishers are looking for is the next Me Too. The next thing, so if something worked really well, a year ago, or even better, 6 months ago, what you see is the Me Too of, okay, vampires are this year's, black, so let's give a whole bunch more vampires, more magicians. Did we wear those out? Let's move on to werewolves and zombies. And I think that what we need to get to, what I would like to see, is more creative and speculative fiction that breaks those molds or exploits them in fresh directions, succeeding. So that's where I'm putting my juice. That's where I'm putting my energy. That's how I'm trying to write fiction. By taking a journalism plot and making it a fictional mystery, and making my detectives reporters, and making one of them young and excitable, making one of them old, kind of lost and cynical. What I was trying to do was make journalism span generations and also show the importance of local investigations, because I think that's a mission that we really need to keep alive. Does that answer your question?
That's all the questions we have for you. Do you have any questions for us?
And feel free to ask me anything else that brings to mind. I guarantee I'll over-answer.
Hey, Paul, this is Bill. Good to see you, old friend.
Yeah, Bill, it's great to see you.
Yeah, thanks for doing this.
Congratulations on keeping every hair.
Well, it's a little gray, though. Talk about the value of, we have a variety of different majors here, and Paul and I were in high school together, and we went to a private, kind of a liberal arts high school, and you ended up getting a poetry degree. Tell these kids that there's hope for a liberal arts degree person.
Well, the thing, there are many things that happen at college besides getting a ticket to board the business train. The most important thing that I think you can do in college is learn how to learn. Learn how to research, learn how to codify information in your brain, learn how to follow inspiration, learn how to communicate, both with your teachers and your other students, learn how to probe information sources and get what you want. Those aren't skills that are confined to any particular discipline. Those are skills that transfer across the broad spectrum of human activity. One that is really important for any student or any human being, I think, is to have all parts of the self engaged. And I'm not talking just about the acquisitive parts that wish to make a good living and acquire possessions, a suitable mate, and move on into a good material life. There was there's a couple of relevant cliches, one of which I'd like to apply, which is do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. What do you love? That's a very important thing to find out. And, it may be, depending on your religious beliefs, you may or may not believe in a soul of an individual's, but let's use that word for the time being. What is your individual soul? What delights you in terms of your vision, your experience, and what gifts would you like to give to other human beings? What has been the view of people who preceded you? And a liberal arts education, those are the things that you most quickly discover. I don't know that you discover it as quickly in getting your MBA or your law degree. You can get a liberal degree, or at least add liberal add-ons, and then when you move into law, maybe you'll know what kind of causes you want to fight for. If you move into politics, maybe you'll know what your grand beliefs are. If you move into business, maybe you'll know whether you want to create products that nurture or or have an indifferent value. And so those are the things that I would say are valuable about liberal education.
Well, I just want to say thanks so much for giving us your time.